Thank you. And if anyone is working through something and you don't want me to record your screen or your project because it's like top secret, totally fine. Just let me know and I'll pause the recording. Okay. All right. So Chief had a couple of questions, Dorian and Drew. The first one was, it sounds like you were playing with the elements, some of the base elements in the toolkit, and you kind of messed it up and you want to know, how do I put it back to what it was before? Is that right?
Yeah, I notice sometimes when I'm in there, when I'm tinkering with the elements, and maybe sometimes it'll pop up and I'll try to add like a pseudo class and it won't actually populate the pseudo class correctly or something like that. And sometimes if I just remove the element and replace it, it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it gets to the point where things aren't working right and I just kind of move everything to a pattern and then I shift it off board it and re-import it into a new project, or I start from scratch completely. So I was wondering if there's a way, like if you're in Builder and you're working and say you're, hours deep into a project and you come across that without having to like stop and do all those extra steps to try to mitigate on the user end, is there a way to possibly revert the element and maybe even the actions back to their original state when you first loaded up the studio, or is that even a thing?
Yeah. So Dorian or Drew, do one of y'all want to spin up the studio so we could just kind of like look at it as we're talking about it? So number one thing that I'll tell you, John, is duplicate it before you start tinkering with it. So that, which you can easily do, just click the menu and Drew or Dorian, who's going to show.
Yeah, do you want to do it, Dorian? You want me to?
I can do it. I'm just signing back into Builder.
That's exactly what I was doing. I was
What,
like,
y'all were signed out? How
I
dare
was
you?
working on my personal one.
yeah, I switch back and forth, so I'm always in the wrong one at the sign out. and sign in.
1 second. Or
Okay.
if
Would
you
that
have
also
yours
be
up-
the backing up? Would that also be safe to say that like saving multiple deployments would be another good way to back up?
Well, I don't think that actually reverses the state of the element. It'll reverse the way that it's actually like used in the project, I believe. So like the way that you've configured it. If you revert that, but I actually don't think, right, Dorian, if you go in and you make a change to an element in the toolkit and then you go back to a previous revision, it doesn't actually, none of that affects the toolkit, right?
It does, because it restores the entire revision. But I don't think you're going into the element types, right? I think you're just referring, like you're just building elements on the page.
Yeah, I'm not really going into the element types. Yeah, just messing mainly with the JSON data, and then sometimes like the other day when I locked up the whole playground. But usually it's not that bad. Usually it's just like say you want to add a pseudo element and it just gives you this weird like output instead of the normal pseudo element output for CSS and things like that.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious on what you're seeing there whenever you're messing with those style classes. I don't know if maybe you can show us.
I don't know if I could actually replicate it or not.
Gotcha.
I don't think I have one pulled up where it's actually doing that at the moment, but I know I ran across it. I ran across it today and I just blew it away and then just
like
redid it.
what happens, just so I can understand a little bit better.
Yeah, let me see if I can open my screen and show on the styling maybe.
Yeah.
Share screen. This might get interesting. Oh, there it is.
Right, break it again, John.
No. So hopefully you can see the screen.
Yeah, we can see it.
Let me move this silly thing out of the way. But yeah, so when I go into styling, and if I go into like say a hover or something like that,
Yeah.
and then I go into the, come on, man. Then I go into the CSS, like this here. This is a good example, I guess. Where it usually gives you the ID and then it says the colon and then hover, right?
Yeah.
And this is one good example. So I guess I can replicate it.
I think it's just pulling the wrong thing in there, Dorian. Like it's probably just
Yeah, it looks like it's a
That's a media
bug.
query, you
It's
know?
pulling the media query instead of the actual pseudo style of this text span style.
Yeah, and just to be fully transparent about it, inside of the CSS, there is there's a keyframe in there. I don't know if that's
No, it
messy.
shouldn't have any effect, but I think it's just a bug you found. But as a workaround, can you, at the bottom, can you click on use properties instead of CSS?
Ah,
Yeah, it's just a bug when it's grabbing that pseudo class in the CSS, it's just grabbing the wrong ID.
okay.
So
So if it shows up here, that means it's actually working correctly and I don't really have to worry about it as long as it's showing up here.
yeah, and I would edit it directly in here because it's, if you try to edit the one that loads in the CSS, it's going to attempt to update the media. Yeah, it's just a bug. But we'll get that taken care of.
This is maybe I can try to drop like, I don't know, I don't want to mess this thing up or nothing, but let me try something simple like font weight 300 and then go back and then see what happens in here.
Yeah, it's like going into the use properties fixes the ID because now when you go to the CSS and now loaded the correct one.
Yeah. Okay.
So maybe just do that trick for now. Go to use properties, then go to CSS. That's interesting.
No, that's a good one though. It's,
Okay, so this one's twofold. One, thank you, John, for finding the bug.
Yeah.
I will write that up. But two, say there was no bug and it was just like, hey, I'm messing with this and I need to revert. Right now, all the stuff that we track is not available to them in the UI yet for reverting individual elements. So what do y'all recommend? Do you recommend like, hey, before you're going to go make big styling changes, create, publish to a deployment so that you can create a snapshot of your project in time? That way, if you need to roll back, you can just change your revision to that. Is there anything aside from that you guys would use?
I mean, you could do that for sure, but if you already messed something up and it's like too late to do that, basically, the way you fix it, I think the only way really is just by copying and pasting all the different things. Like you can basically go into each part that you need. So if it's an action, you can go into all the JavaScript and the JSON of it. If it's an element, same thing. If it's styles, you can go like into each, each main style, each pseudo style, each media query. Individually though, you have to do it individually, and just if you copy paste all those values, you can restore anything. It's just a little tedious.
Yeah, I've had to do that a couple times too, where I've actually started doing that as a habit, where I'll actually, before I start tinkering with the JSON data, I'll actually copy it and put it on the
I do that. I do that all the time for sure.
and go back in just in case. Yeah.
Yeah, for now, we definitely have all the history already. We just need to implement a whole UI around that to easily allow you to basically say, hey, go back to this date time, and then everything gets restored to that state. But until then, unfortunately, it is just a tedious copy and paste.
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
Grab a notepad and write it down. And sorry that it's not more helpful. Maybe we can help you with the next one, John, which was, let me see, multiple selectors, how to handle the CSS for multiple selectors.
Yeah, so do something really quick here. I think I got it working, maybe, but this was my solution, what I tried, and it seems to be working correctly, at least. But what I end up doing was I did just like I did in the chat. I just did the first selector, and then I copied the selector ID and I added the second selector. So it says hover here, but it's really actually hover and focus visible at the same time.
Yeah, and that's exactly correct.
Okay.
It's literally just you type it straight in. There's no UI around that, but you can do any. You can essentially use any selector syntax. You just have to manually go in there and type it in.
Okay, so it'd start with the dot with the CSS underscore.
Correct.
Colon, whatever the pseudo class is, because I know a lot of those things. And when I first started messing with it, I had not issues, but I was a little confused on how to do that. And I think at one point, Drew told me, yeah, just throw it in the page headers and you could just pull the stuff from there with the class, with the external classes. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. But I wanted to make it more native to Builder. So
yeah, that's how I do it. I always just use the use properties, but same method. And here, let me chat what I used to go, because I don't remember all the different things, but W3 Schools has a nice reference, and you can essentially use all of that in Builder. You just have to understand, you just have to go get the style ID, because that's what we use. So it's dot CSS underscore the ID of the style.
yeah, there's a ton of, I've run across 5 or 6 new ones that I didn't even know existed in the last.
Yeah, it's really cool, very powerful. Just like how you did your tooltips, your targeting and attribute.
Yeah.
Super powerful. You can do greater thans plus less thans to target all the children, and things like that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I just want to make sure I try to do it as Builder native as possible. So I'm not just like throwing not janky code, but throwing code in the page header and then just doing it that way. Because I feel like for me, that's a band-aid and you can't really replicate. In some cases you can replicate it, but a lot of cases you can't replicate that across multiple pages in a project.
Exactly. Yeah. Using the style, you definitely nailed it. That's the way to do it. Eventually we'll definitely want to build a full UI to just allow you to do that all through a GUI form.
Yeah.
But until then, it does have to be manually edited in that selector field.
Okay. Anything else, John?
No, that's all my questions. I think I got everything.
I have a quick question. Feedback from y'all. So you know how we track every single change that's made in the project. For Dorian was alluding to potentially creating an awesome debugger, and then 2, like being able to revert things. Dorian, you mentioned doing it by like date and time. And so I want to know, like, would that even make sense to you guys? If you were wanting, what would be most useful to you if you were making some changes and you needed to revert something back? Like, would you want to say, hey, I'm going to create a snapshot of this element like as it is right now before I go make changes? Or would you be even able to tell, hey, I want to take it back to the way where it was Thursday at 4 p.m. Like, would that even be useful? The reason why I asked that is because I know, Fraser, we've talked about the revisions, right? And right now it's just a timestamp and you don't really know what's in that. So I'm curious what you guys would think. Would you want to be able to control when you take a specific snapshot, or would you just want to see a list of like every single change that's been made to an element, or would that be overwhelming?
So I know for me personally, I've used a ton of no-code tools, and some of the better ones that I've used that are not necessarily the best have had a way to give you like a breadcrumb trail of every single thing that you do like along the way, and it has it labeled by that div or by that whatever it was you were doing, and then they make it, and I've seen 2 or 3 of them do it pretty much the same way. They make it so you can just literally click on the spot where you want to go back to, and that's more for like within sitting down at the keyboard time for maybe an hour or 2 or however long you're working on a project, not necessarily going back like a week or 2 weeks. But those immediate like reverts, especially when you run into things in Builder, it would be nice to have like a breadcrumb trail or something of that nature, that kind of UI to it. has always been really helpful for me.
So for your thinking on a shorter time frame, to see like a breadcrumb for a shorter time frame, does anyone else have feedback?
So there's a couple of ways that I've done it in the past. One is just a straight up undo function. So you just add a regular old undo. Everybody knows how to use that. It's ubiquitous in almost every application. So if you could do that, that would go a long way to, you wouldn't need a whole lot of training on how to do it. And then what Jan just talked about, which is, you know, an audit trail where you can basically select and sort of auto committing, right? And then another option is kind of like, and this is much more involved, would be something like how GitHub does it, where you basically have commits and you can commit to a repo. I don't know if you would even want to use GitHub behind the scenes. I'm not sure if you could, but it seems like that's sort of the Cadillac that gives you all kinds of options. You can branch and you can, you know, do all the things that you know, real developers, you know, hardcore developers use in writing, you know, your React and all that stuff, your you know, traditional sort of code. So, I mean, obviously there's a trade-off for a no code tool. Learning GitHub is non-trivial.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to no code it up somehow, but
yeah. But undo is, everybody knows how you'd undo. That's been since 1985, right? So
okay, thank you, George. Josh, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, my votes or just thought process would be and more definitely all those like undos and stuff in the short term, like seeing what I just did is always valuable. But I also think more macro, like over like the course of a week or multiple weeks, especially if you have multiple projects, being able to see the timestamps of when I did it. I can definitely usually like look at a calendar and think through like when I did something and when I was working on something, and then think about when I may have broken something or changed something that I need to go back to a state before that. Snapshots are good. My only downside with snapshots is I'm going to forget. If I have to manually do that, I'm going to forget all the time to do that more often than not. And so definitely, I think it has to be passive in some way, shape, or form. And I think especially too, if you could overlay a timeline of like a login time, like maybe if you published to test or production, you could start mapping it to like, oh, like I remember I did the production update that day at this time. And so I could think about when what may have happened after that sequence. So if you overlaid other things that you were doing in Builder at the same time, that may have not been a change to the thing, but an activity that you did as a user, that'd be really powerful to pinpoint states that you might want to go back to.
Okay. And yeah, we're actually going to be adding, when we go redo the publish, or when Dorian goes and redoes the publish, we're going to be adding notes to when you do publishes. So you can be like, all right, you know, publish dev to test. All right, here's what, you know, here's what I rolled out. And then you can refer to that. So we'll definitely add that in. Okay, so that's awesome feedback. Thank you. I just wanted to ask that, you know, before we go make something. It's good to know what you actually want. Okay, super. Okay, so let's keep rolling. Elspeth, are you still on the call? No. Okay, darn. All right. So Josh, we can go over what you had, what you were working on with Google Analytics. Do you want to walk us through the issue you were having?
Yeah, I will share one of these screens. I got a lot of screens up right now, apparently, that I don't know which one's which. 1 second. It's this one. Okay. There we go. So the main goal right now is just the way GA4 set up. If no one's worked with it, you pass like a user ID to GA4 to then identify all the individual events that user's, like where they came from originally, if it was a campaign or like organic social or something. But to tie it to a specific user, you need to like have a user ID that you pass to Google to do that. And so we do that. It's just our user IDs, which is good. The normal way to do this is in the header tag to actually have the user ID passed in at that point. And so I'm grabbing from like deal machine system, the user ID that we would want to use already, and it's stored locally in like their record. But to my knowledge and what I came across was using the like the data dot filter set dot field value was only working, I think, for if that page specifically was dynamically correlated to a specific collection. So I couldn't pull up the data because I think it's server side versus local. That's a guess on my part, but it didn't work. I tried it and it just was, this is what I expected before I did it. I just verified that. It just pulled in this still. And so I think the other way I can do this is with a data layer, with just a push to it via this JavaScript function. And so I've never done a fully custom JavaScript function myself. And so really, I think ultimately I got to like, one, I guess, confirming that that was a correct interpretation of the first issue. And then second, just knowing the right way to do this JavaScript function correctly.
Yeah, and I think you wouldn't even need this level of function. I think all you need to do is just use the action type that's already built in. What's it called? It's like run JavaScript function or something like that.
Yeah.
So the only reason I took it that far is because there might be like a lot of other variables in the future in theory.
And they're like variables from the builder database and stuff, or from the projects, basically. Like you want to set them with inputs.
Yeah, they could be any number of like a specific action that they take to like a specific variable stored on that contact record. It could vary a lot over time.
Gotcha. Then yeah, then you probably will want to keep it that way.
Yeah, I think you're on the right path, and you're probably like most of the way there. I don't know exactly where it ends, but you're getting there.
So let's see. So I guess one of the first questions I had was like, this is basically like if we go here, like this is like what they say to do to push it. I think that the function already existed via like the header file with the Google Tag Manager. So I guess my first question is just, is this connecting the variables correctly? So like if I did this, is it going to use a variable that's put into that via the actions or the arguments? Or what's the right way I need to make sure that this is calling in the variable value that I'm giving it in the arguments?
If you use, so like you have it in quotes in brackets, but what you want to use is just the word, no quotes, no brackets. So variable in the first part. Actually, that maybe I'll do that one a little differently, because that's a name. That's like a variable as a variable name. But like for the value, you just want to put the actual value in there. So like for the value, for sure, you just remove the quotes too, because you're going to use the value, the variable value from line 2.
Gotcha. And so I know the reason I had the quotes there was because it had the quotes in this function. Does builder automatically do that part?
It's because they're passing a string. Sorry, Sharon. And like yours, you're using a variable. So it's just like, because you're using a variable, JavaScript will convert it to the string for you.
Gotcha.
But yeah, for that first one, it's like that's the name of a key, and I don't think this will work directly. I think you have to do something slightly different. I'm not actually sure. Maybe I can Google it quick.
And so just the way this had been set up all the way through was I just had like a create.
Yeah, and Fraser just suggested that it does need the brackets for the key name.
The key name,
yeah. But leave the quotes out.
Okay, yeah, just the brackets. I see. Cool.
So the squiggly brackets are like
square brackets,
straight,
brackets. Yeah, that just allows you to set the name as a variable.
No. Leave that one without it.
Yeah. That's just JavaScript syntax, just like stupid little quirks.
So in theory, both of these are variables that are coming in.
Yep.
Yeah.
So even with that, it's correct.
Yeah. It's confusing because they're both variables, but you're using one as a value and one as a key name. So you have to like display them differently because the way JavaScript is. Normally they would look the same. It does feel weird they don't look the same, but
okay. As long as
trust us.
I trust you guys.
And can we look at go to the action type Let's just make sure this is pointing to that function correctly.
So I have this function and then static value. So I'm just going to type in the user or just typing that in, and then the
Yeah.
value is actually the
Nice.
variable it's coming in.
And then go open that user argument, the user ID. So I'll make sure the name matches. So the name needs to match, or no, because the function, it'll map it, right? So no, you're good.
Yeah, so it'll just map directly.
Yeah.
None of this matters, right?
No, as long
That's
as
just
that's where
very
you're getting
default.
it from, then you're good.
Okay, I honestly, I think I'm good. As long as all that looks right to you guys, I think I'm good, because it's going to take me actually longer to test it. Because I need to go look at a database that I don't have access to quite yet.
Gotcha. Yeah,
But if
just
that
check
looks good, then that was really what I needed.
Cool. Yeah, I think if you run into problems, it'll be around that actual JavaScript line of like data layer. Like maybe you'll need to put something before or after, but you're definitely close, or it'll just work.
Okay, cool.
All right, thank you, Josh. Thank you, Dorian and Drew. And thank you, John. He suggested this tool that you can use that will do all the styling of that for you if you just tell it what it needs to be. So that sounds cool. Okay, so we've got something. Is Karsh in here today? And no, I don't see him. But he did ask in flows in Discord. Looks like he was having some trouble with the authentication pattern. So here's his question, and maybe we can kind of go through it, or Drew, you can take us through the user auth pattern. All right, so he was asking, I have a question about the user auth pattern, especially about the sign-up flow. How do you set up validation? How do you check if the email input is actually an email, or if you add more fields like a name field, for example? How do you check if all the inputs are filed before signing up the user? I think he means like required fields.
Mhm.
And I know there are countless ways of doing something, but what do you suggest is the best way and the fastest to modify the current pattern? So can we show maybe adding an additional field and making it required before you can click the button? That's really the best way to do that, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's like a couple of things, because I think he's trying to validate the email to
Mhm.
validate that it's an actual email, which we have a condition called condition validate email address. So that'd be like the first step he does. And then as a second step, if that passes, then he would then do just a regular condition to make sure if any of the required fields have a value, right?
Yeah. I mean, maybe I can probably like show something, but it's funny. It's one of those things where there's so many ways to do it. Just like figure out a way to prove their value. So like what I often do, say there's like 3 fields, I'll have like 3 conditions that are just chained together. So
Yeah.
I'll disable a submit button and I'll check the first field. If it has a value, go to the next condition, check the second field. If it has a value, go to the third. You know, at the end, you enable that submit button. Like something like that is like a simple thing which I could show, but also if you didn't feel like doing it that way, there's like countless other ways you could try to get it done. So
Yeah, let's show
Good
that
for
method.
anyway. But also the SaaS starter has login, and it's got to have something already set up, because you put in like your name and your email, and then you can click the link. So that probably already has a lot of setup. Yeah, I don't know if it validates the email address, but I know that it's got the additional field.
Yeah, and on a different part in the SaaS starter, it does a validation check. Like in creating a new customer or some of the other ones, it checks each field is completed, and yeah, it kind of does that 1, 2, 3 flow.
Yeah.
we pull that up and look at it. I actually am not familiar at all with it, but I can pull up a project with that if it makes sense. Want to see?
Yeah, let's create one. Yeah, me neither. I never go into the details of that one. But I do have an action that we're in the middle of that I started a while back and need to finish it. And it's a single condition where you can map multiple required fields so that you don't have to create a chain of conditions. So I need to go find that and wrap that up because that will make this process super easy to implement.
John says, yes, you do. It sounds like he really wants that.
Yeah, no, I actually forgot we started that, and yeah, I need to get back to that. I need to go find that, but we have it in the works.
Let's see.
I'm also excited for that.
Yeah, yeah, because I'd get tired of having to go create all the, like if I have a big form with like 20 validations that I need to do, it just takes a long time to set that up and chain link them all.
Yeah.
I don't know like at all what I'm looking for, like how this is set up. So I'm just clicking through. If anyone can guide me, that'd be good. Otherwise, I'll just click through.
What happens on the event of that email address field? Yeah, there it is, validate. So it does validate. Yeah, and that's the validate email address action.
So yeah, this action is specific to just email addresses, right? But that's the first part of the question, where you just set it to the input and ask, it runs one action if it's valid and one action if it's not valid.
Okay.
So in this one, and this is also, I guess, an example of chaining it together, it looks like. So step one, and it's labeled in the action, in the flow as step one, so it can stay organized. But it's validates the email. If it's valid, it goes to validate step two, which is checking for the password. It's another condition, like a regular condition, that says if the input password is not blank, so if they have a password filled out, then go to validate step three. If not, it's disabling the sign up button. But validate step three is checking the name field. If the name is not blank, enable the sign up button, or enable the sign up. So the enable sign up is just one flow that will remove the disabled and set the interaction of the click of the sign up button to actually run the sign up flow. Right here.
Okay. So it
I
looks
mean,
like
that's probably the best way to do it. It's a little tedious, and Dorian's action will just take, remove 3 steps out of this, but
okay, but
Yeah.
it looks like first you have to create a style class to hide or disable the button.
so in this case, there's a style class called button disabled, it looks like. But there's also here element remove attribute. So that's the actual attribute disabled. The safe, like correct way to disable and enable a button or an input or anything is to use this attribute. And so if you use the attribute and you're just, so this is sign up enable, we're removing the disabled attribute, and then sign up disable will have one where it adds disabled equals true. So when you do that, then you can use in here, there's a state for disabled. So if you have that attribute disabled on, whatever styles you put in here will apply. And if you do that, you don't have to add or remove a class. It makes it like kind of a little easier, but you have to understand it. It's a little more complex to understand.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's just the preference, because
Yeah.
like if the user didn't even want to mess with like a CSS style class, like on the flow that enables the button or disables the button, they can just use the set style. I don't remember what it's called, set style action. And you can just set like opacity 0.5 or opacity 1 to reset it. So there's just many different ways to do it.
And in Builder too, that we have this like third check where we're setting the element interaction. So the button on click is doing nothing. So even if it wasn't fully disabled, it's not, when people click on it, it's not going to run the action now because we removed it in this flow. So there's actually like 3 different ways here that we're disabling that button, but that's good for UI.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Fraser just shared a link in Discord where he does all of these, the email validation and required fields through the run JavaScript action.
Oh, nice.
The more if for a coder, you can use that method so you don't have to go create and chain all the conditions.
All right. We got options. Okay. I will let Karsh know. Okay, cool. So I only have one other question that I want to go through. It's for Elspeth, who she joined, but I guess it looks like she had to drop off. But I would love to see if we could talk about it. And I can just send her a clip later. So Elspeth was the one who was wanting to potentially connect to her SQL database. And she's wanting to learn about database API calls. And, she's asking, do I need to independently create the endpoints first? If so, any recommendations on how to do so? And I know maybe there were a few different ways to do that. So I was wondering if you guys could share some more information that might help her.
Yes, I guess regarding the endpoints, those do need to be set up outside of Builder, because those endpoints are the endpoints connected to your SQL server. Sorry, there's like really loud thunder here. I know there's definitely third parties that you can pay. I'm not sure what the pricing is for that, where they allow you to easily connect your SQL database to that third-party application, and that automatically creates all your get put posts or patch endpoints. But I'm not too sure exactly which one to go with. I've never used one before, so I'm not sure. There's a third method, which is going directly to SQL, just doing like a SQL connection. I haven't tried it, and I'm not sure what all the details are involved yet, but it is something that intrigued me the other day. So it's something I've been slowly looking at, but I haven't really spent much time on it. So I'm not sure yet how to go about implementing that, but I would expect it's definitely something that's doable, but that method will require writing code for sure. I don't know, Drew, if you have any other suggestions there.
I'm not really an expert in it in SQL and like that level. Like I've done it all in the course of my career, but I don't really know. Like I think my mind goes to like creating an API basically. Like anytime you have a database on your server, you'd like put an application in front of it, like a PHP application or something to create some endpoints as an API. That's traditionally what I would always do. So
yeah, and I had found that link. I don't know, Cora, if you saved that. I can't find it now. There was a third party that, oh, I found it. Let me share it here.
Yep.
I'm not sure what the pricing is on it, but that was something I had found that looked like it was pretty easy to set up.
Okay. Cool. So can you walk me just like zooming out if they were to use something like that? So essentially they would create API endpoints either using a third-party service or if possible in SQL directly. I'm guessing you'd probably have to have some sort of permissions that would allow for some back and forth or connection with that. But then you would use what actions in Builder if you were wanting to build an app that had the ability to create, read, update, and delete the data from SQL.
Yeah, so once you have your endpoints set up, essentially in Builder, all you're doing is just using our standard API call actions. And the URL is just pointing to that endpoint that was created. The method depends on what methods you're using for that endpoint. And then the data format will depend on what the endpoint is expecting. So if it's JSON, it's JSON. If it's requiring like SQL queries instead, then they'll need to format it in that method. It's a little bit different. So you're doing like selects or updates, deletes, things like that. It just really depends. There's just too much unknown to really know.
Yeah, you'd have to specifically know like what the setup is and what their settings are, but we could probably help someone through that process if they were able to share those details. Okay. Excellent. And so it looks like hevodata.com is the service that Dorian found that could potentially be of help
Yeah.
for creating those endpoints with SQL. Okay.
Yeah, and that may not even work. It just depends on their setup. Because if it's like on a server that they own in SQL, then yeah, you can install that third-party thing. But
Mhm.
if it's just like a shared SQL server or something like that, where you don't have access to the actual server itself to install things, then that method's not going to work. So
Gotcha.
there's just too many unknowns, really.
Okay. All right. So we need some more info.
Mhm.
Okay. Cool. Well, that is all that I had on my list as far as stuff to cover today. Did anyone have anything that they needed to go through in their projects or any questions for us? You're letting us off early today.
I've got a
Okay.
quickie.
Oh yeah, come on, Alex.
I feel like I've been through this before, but I don't know how to do it. But I was just looking at putting like a range slider in, like to record like from 1 to 10 and then record that value to a database. Is that something we could jump through real quick?
Yeah,
Let me have a look here.
just pop back into this.
Do we have an input for that already, or?
I've got a I've got a dummy one set up if
Oh, we do have one, actually.
We do have one.
Yeah, I've never used it.
Yeah, I mean, if not, I was gonna just go change it out. But basically, it's because it's a built-into HTML thing. Oh yeah, right here. So range slider element, and then at this point, like this looks different, but range slider is really an input. So if you want to save the value, you do from element value, like another input that they just type into.
Yeah.
But you just set minimum, maximum, and the step is how much it increments with each slide. That's all it is. Is
Yeah.
that, did you try that or you didn't find that element?
no, I did, yeah.
Oh.
So oh yeah. Okay. So do I
Yeah, for
like
your
element
screen.
set data or
It'd
How
be
is
the
it
So
value.
like, how would I what? Get like set something into it originally?
so how would it record like from the slider to a database?
So it's just like if I had an input,
Yeah.
like a text input, you know?
Uh,
So there's all the same options. I'm just gonna put this in for comparison.
Yeah.
And actually, maybe I should zoom in a bit here. So it's like text input and then slider input.
yeah.
So you can bind either of them from here to get the original data. So if you need to bind it to a data collection, you just set that up in here.
Yeah.
And then say you're doing an action where you're creating a record and you
Yeah.
want a value, store a value in the database. You know, you pick your table, you pick your field. Oh, it's a bad field to pick, but you just say from element value.
Yeah.
And then select the range slider. And
Yeah.
it'll save that, you know, to this field in the database. I wouldn't save it to deleted. But yeah, that's how you would save it. And then same with like getting and setting, you know, if you did element set value, and set of any number into it, it would move. And then, you know, same as an input, like if you want to save when it's changed on the event, on the change, you do auto save. Or, you know, if you have your own flow to run manually, just change it to whatever your flow is.
Okay, cool.
But it should act just like you had them typing in their name in a profile. You know what I mean? I think everything else is the same.
Okay, cool.
Does that answer your question, or you were trying that and it wasn't working?
I've only like tried it super quickly, so I'll have another dig in that should get me going. If not, I'll ping it in the Discord.
Yeah, yeah.
And we
Thanks
should
so much.
look to see what that ghost
I know,
last
I was
argument
curious.
is.
An extra argument sitting in here.
Wait, what ghost?
Inner HTML.
Interesting.
It's,
Need to clean that up.
in these options, there's just this one that has no label. It just says enter value. My guess was those like external classes or something, but
Oh, okay.
actually inner HTML, which won't show up in here, so I don't even know.
Josh said the deads.
Infiltrating.
Yeah.
On the range slider. Okay. Anybody else? Got anything else? No? Okay. Thank you, Dorian, and thank you, Drew, for a great office hours session. Thank you, everybody. We do this every week, so we'll see you next Thursday. If we didn't get to anything, just chat it in the Discord and we'll try to help you out. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Later.